Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm Brad Biehl, and this is Good Traffic. I'm joined today by Barry Green Jr. Barry, thank you so much for joining the show and for being in Good Traffic with me, first and foremost.
Thank you for having me, Brad.
Yeah, so Barry is someone who I look up to in terms of a lot of the content that he's putting out and some of the conversations he's pushing. He's running and kind of leading a online column on Substack that's called Density Dad. Barry, I don't know if people call you Density Dad a lot as an actual
Yeah.
nickname, but it's pretty cool. I think it's something that you should run with as as an alias or as a nickname, because that is an awesome thing. From the first time I read it, I was like, I wish I would have thought of this. Not that I'm a father at this point, but I wish I would have thought of it whenever down the road that comes into play. But so on there, Barry's talking a lot about the crossroads of parenting and urbanism in the built environment, and we're going to get into all that shortly. Barry also is the owner of Shades of Moss, a local Richmond, Virginia plant and record shop, small business in one of America's great cities. And we're also going to dive into a little bit about that and Barry's work there and Barry's place in Richmond, Virginia as well. But Barry, thanks again for coming on the show. And yeah, did I leave anything out there? I know you got an impressive bio, doing a lot of things. You know, you're like me in a lot of ways. It seems like a generalist and really involved in some great stuff. So
Yeah, I just like to learn, right? So I got my hands in a few things, but yeah, I think you nailed it. And again, I can't wait to jump into the conversation.
amazing. Yeah. Well, first of all, let's just start off by talking about the kind of framework and framing of Density Dad as a statement and as kind of your title in a lot of ways and in a lot of the work that you're putting out publicly. Density, as I think you could attest to, is a concept in this country that we often associate with young people, with young single folks who are still living in the city before they, grow up and mature and move to
Yep,
the
yep,
suburbs and get land like, real American adults do. That
yep.
kind of, storyline that has persisted for so long. So to kind of put the word density next to the word dad and the concept of fatherhood and family and all of these
Right.
things, it's a really interesting thing that I love, and I think is challenging that conventional American dream mindset of buy property, get out of the city as you age, and
Yep.
get out of your fun years. That's for a different point of life. So I'm curious, can you just kind of give a little background as to how you arrived at that kind of crossroads and why you thought the cross of parenting and the cross of urbanism and density specifically was a great place for you to start and for you to start sharing messages?
Absolutely. So I've been just, I don't want to say the orange pill per se, but caught myself watching, a lot of urbanism and pro biking infrastructure and just learning more about urbanism. And I feel like I've always loved the concept and being present and being able to experience it, but I didn't know the term. And I think that's a lot of us,
Mm,
right? It's like we're living in the city. We love like being able to walk to certain things, but we don't really know what that term is. So in the past 4 or 5 years, I started to learn that term a little bit more. And when living in Charlotte and having my first kid, it was a opportunity to understand what it felt like to not have those things anymore, as we look for more space, right? Some of the obstacles you have when, oh, we need more than a 1 bedroom now. We need a 2 bedroom. And the price that's associated with a 2 bedroom in a walkable neighborhood. So Density Dad was born. And it was a way to um, make the word density a bit more um, gentle. It's a
yes.
knee jerker, right? Anytime you
Yeah.
use a term in a public meeting or in a conversation with someone who may not understand, they just immediately go to um, something negative. And there's a lot of things that we appreciate about density. We just don't know that that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, just being able to put those two things together, and when you say it aloud, I always hear like, "Oh, that's cute," or "Oh, man, I really like that." So it already like lowers the temperature in the room,
Sure.
and then it opens the conversation to be a less offensive and more engaging.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I think in this country, when we say the word density, the first image that comes to mind, right, is big block skyscraper, a
Yeah.
very certain architectural style that we often associate
Yep.
with that kind of thing. And I don't think we always think about density in the softer, gentler sense that you speak
Yes.
of. And I think that a lot of us in the urbanism conversation are talking about, which is, hey, if you do lower rise buildings that are just
Yep.
higher density than single family homes, but more consistently, you don't actually need the high and mighty skyscraper that has kind of created this brutal sense of density that I think a lot of people are afraid of. I'm curious if you, as someone, and this might come out as an answer through kind of your work as an entrepreneur and a small business owner in a community itself, but how have you seen that in American cities? Like, have you found yourself to be in pockets where they've done a good job of that, or maybe
Yes.
not so much? And has it been? I guess what I'm getting at, has it been more the positive example that's influenced and motivated you to speak on this stuff, or has it maybe been the negative examples more so?
Oh, it's definitely been the positive. So, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, who I feel has great, infrastructure for density as far as land use. We all could be doing better, but I just feel like the overall fabric of what we have in our downtown core and just outside in some streetcar neighborhoods is just great.
Mm.
And that comes from being the first city with an electric streetcar system. So a lot of that fabric is left behind. So that's, that was one thing, but I didn't experience that until my later years. But more recent, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was in Elizabeth neighborhood and I had a 1 bedroom with my wife. Um, and it was a pre-war apartment, so pretty cheap, right? $100,000, but we could walk to everything. There was a Starbucks across the street, several restaurants. We could walk to the grocery store, and nothing was more um, healing, like just a great experience than being able to just walk after a day of work and clear our heads and talk about our day. And we might be going for a beer, we might be just walking and talking, but like having the option of like, what are we going to do today, like which way are we going
Mm.
to walk, which, and to the point that like my wife, she doesn't know what urbanism really is, but like through that, like she wants to go back. She's like, what can we do to get back to that neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
And then I also experienced it in smaller cities like Statesville, North Carolina, being close
Hmm.
to their downtown fabric. And I think seeing both sides of it when you're in a small, town that has that like, lifetime charm, and, you have the record shop and the coffee shop and all these things. I've experienced it there where you can just park the car and just walk. But I've also experienced it where I can just leave my house and just
Hmm.
walk and explore and get lost. And I think both sides of that is just really more positive than negatives. I mean, there's a lot of negatives to density. I think, it's not to sugarcoat it at all, but I think there's more positives for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. What in some of those communities, because it sounds like you've spent a good amount of time in some bigger cities and also some
Yes.
smaller ones as well. Have there been any common threads that you've noticed then that kind of persist, whether or not it's a big city, small town? I mean, you're familiar with the strong towns movement,
Yes.
which is has a lot of great momentum and leads a lot of great conversations. And it's funny because a lot of their urbanist work is actually not in urban areas
Yes.
inherently at
Yep.
all. And so whenever I hear someone say they've spent ample time in both places, I'm always really curious as to, was there anything common that you think maybe big cities could learn from small towns or vice versa, or that has been in both and maybe should just be in more of both sizes throughout the US?
Absolutely. So I think on both the big city and the small town. So there's actually a, I guess, micro Substack I have called, um, small town loving, right? And what
Mm,
I do is I cover the small towns that I've had the pleasure of either living in or experiencing, and what big cities can learn from them. And often it's small things, right? It's getting the wide sidewalks right, getting the shared parking right, getting the downtown park right with the play area, right? Like the
yeah.
small stuff that like I think big cities get lost in because they're just consistently trying to grow. And so, yeah, spending time in Brooklyn, New York, and then coming back to Charlotte, and then moving to Richmond, and like getting to experience all these things in about a 10-year frame. I saw tons of similarities. I mean, obviously the ability to take the train anywhere was, eye opening, but um, the people, I think, is the common amongst it all, is when you really bring people together, it's a big
Mm,
difference. And I notice when I'm out in, the suburbs, it's just not the same. You might come across friendly people, but they really don't know how to interact as much as those who almost, I don't want to say have, they're forced to be, but they know, that they're going to have to come across a conversation with someone by the end of the day. They
yeah.
can't get into their car, get into their office, work all day, and then like, just be so isolated, and
Right.
I think that's the part that in all of the small towns and the more urban, dense locations, the people that embrace the fact that, yep, I'm going to be a regular here, or I'm going to see my regulars here, or they know everyone from church, just like the stuff that, dense areas allow, I think is the common point for it all.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think we always, I mean, and you're involved in some entrepreneurial endeavors, and we always talk about getting yourself uncomfortable and becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I think there's a value of that in your day-to-day life in a built environment too, right? Like when you don't have the antisocial escape of being able to
Yes.
climb inside a vessel that closes
Yes.
you off, you might feel actually sometimes more uncomfortable. You might
Yes.
feel your brain might tell you that you're unsafe because you're around strangers, but in actuality, you're probably leaving the door open to some really magical stuff that's going to happen. And I mean, talk ad nauseum about the idea of missing out on serendipitous moments and
Yes.
interactions. And as someone who kind of owns a space or runs and owns a space that is a community hub in a lot of ways
Yeah.
in one of these American cities, like how have you, was that maybe part of your motivation first of all, was creating a space where interactions could occur, and like how have you watched that play out over the years in like a real first hand first row type of seat viewpoint?
It's been incredible. I think you nailed it with the, serendipitous moments, right? Where, you know, my city councilor comes in to buy a plant.
Hmm.
And while she's talking to me and having a conversation about, what plant she needs, my regular comes in and they're having a conversation about their lunch that they have next week. And it's like I get to experience that with them, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, see you next Tuesday, just like being a part of the truly like the community, right? And not just being like another retail shop. And so um that's the beauty that a lot of us miss out on when we're um you know kind of tied away in a vehicle. I get it often when I'm on public transit because we're right there on the bus line. There's times where I'm seeing either customers or people recognize me while I'm just getting on public transit, and I'm not getting in my car and just driving off and never seeing them again, right? So that was one like strategic, like, hey, I want to be a part of the community and I want to like figure out how I can do more than just like be physically present. And often what'll happen is people come in and are like, hey, I follow your Substack, like your density there,
Ah.
right? And it's like they get to make the connection of like, oh, he's the plant shop owner, but he's also the guy with the whole new personality and stuff behind, and we get to have a conversation about it. But then they also get
Yeah.
to see I'm actually doing the work. Like I'm not like,
Right.
hey, just all pro density. It's like, no, we actually don't have off street parking. When
Yeah.
I, you know, use my wife's car, yeah, I park on the street. If she drops me off, yep, I'm walking to get something for lunch, like, or I'm
Yeah.
walking to get coffee. So when you support my business, you're supporting the businesses walking distance from my shop. Again, going back to that community part. So, um, I just like to be able to be the positive side of small business ownership in dense neighborhoods because so often it's like this fight of parking, this fight of noise and gentrification, and this fight of like all the negatives. But there's so many positives. There
Mm.
really are, and I can't tell you enough how good it feels to see customers walk by and they don't even stop in. They just wave. They just say hey through the window. Like,
Yeah.
wow, like that makes my day. to be that close, but then it's like, oh, I know he's there whenever I need something, and that you just can't buy that.
Certainly. Yeah, no, that's a powerful message. And I think it speaks to this point of you by trade, going to school, and over time we're not like, I'm going to be an urban planner,
Right.
all your trajectory. And I love folks like that. I myself am that way. And I think it's important that we continue to hear from individuals like yourself who have found a way to make this impact by being a citizen of the
Yeah.
place, not in a technocratic position where they're isolated from the realities of the individuals that they're planning for.
Yeah.
And so, with what you just said, I think there's a lot of folks out there, a lot of folks that I meet that are really, maybe they're just passionate about their city. Maybe they're
Yeah.
passionate about their neighborhood. Maybe they're passionate about their specific block, and they just think that it's a foregone conclusion. They're not aware that there's a path forward to even owning a
Yes.
shop and really having an economic stake
Yeah.
in what goes on in a neighborhood. What would you say maybe is your advice to someone who wants to get started in that regard, and maybe wants to build to a presence like what you have in Richmond, but doesn't know where to get their footing at?
Sure. So I say the first thing is to get out your comfort zone and get out and talk to folks. Before we opened the shop back here in Richmond, so I had a shop in Charlotte for 2 years, um, but I knew, despite being a Richmond native, I couldn't just come here and say, "Yep, I'm just setting up shop, and this is
Mm-hmm.
like what I'm going to do." Like, so we took some plants, we potted them up, did what we would normally do for our shop, and then we reached out to businesses that were adjacent to what I felt like the community I wanted to be a part of. So, for instance, the first one is Outpost Richmond, which is a bike shop that also is a market that
Hmm.
also allows you to grab like wine and beer on the way home. So it's like your bike's being repaired, you can grab a bottle of wine and some snacks and stuff, and you can
Yeah.
buy a gift, and then your bike's done, you can bike home, right? So it's like,
Sure.
I was like, wow, like I think I can put plants in here. I think this is like the adjacent like thing that would work, and it worked. We put
Huh.
like four plants in there, and the four plants was selling, and then we put books in there, and the way I was thinking was small. Like if somebody wanted to go buy a plant, but they didn't want to go to Lowe's or they didn't want to go to Home
Mm.
Depot or these big box hardware stores, they wanted to support local. How could I put it like right in front of them? And so we did that. And then the second location was a coffee shop, Urban
Mm.
Hang Suite here in Richmond, Virginia. So just being able to again think like community adjacent, like yes, I'm a plant shop, but like what shop doesn't need plants, right? And
Sure.
so yeah, I could have like picked a bookstore, like just again community adjacent things, but it was about getting in there, learning the buyer, learning the owner, speaking directly to the owners, and then the way I set it up was like it was almost self serve. So they had a
Mm.
QR code on them. You can just scan it, you can buy it, send the money, and then you know if you had any other questions, you had my information to say, hey, like how often I need to water it, or you and I
Very
can build
cool.
a relationship, but it wouldn't have to be something that fell on the duties of the shop, right?
Mm.
So that was huge. So I would say yes, get out and talk to people and just ask. Like the worst they can say is no.
Yeah.
And so that's one. But the other part is have a clear idea of what you want to do. And it doesn't have to be complete. It just needs to be clear. And I think those are
Sure.
two different things. Like for me, I knew I wanted to bridge plants, music, and then my wife's tea brand. Like I
Mm.
knew in some format we wanted to mix these things up, and it's been very successful. And they're all adjacent to where it's like, yep, I got my plants, I have my music, and I'm gonna sit down and have some tea, right? So
Yeah.
these things just were clear enough, and we're consistently progressing, but we have a clear idea of at least what we want. And I think those two things would truly help because you can't have a conversation with an owner or buyer and not know the clear idea of what you
Mm.
want, right?
Yeah.
Um,
That's awesome. That's super cool to hear. And you're doing this all, like you said, without off street parking, which
yeah,
as a
yeah,
sentence, to some people might be like big deal. Well, it's a massive deal. I think if you look around at the trend in the United States, and oftentimes, if you just read local newspapers, who gets quoted in articles against new bike lane expansion and is kind of weaponized by a group that is usually against those sorts of improvements to public space. And it's often shop owners being quoted as saying, well, how are people going to park to use my store? How are
Oh,
people going to get here if you take the two curb
yes.
spaces away? So what would you say to those folks? Like, in your experience, you've obviously lived this where people have been able to come to your store. You just mentioned how things are thriving in a lot of ways, and
Yeah.
you've become a community hub without off-street parking. So how would you kind of communicate why folks should at least be willing to try a pilot program for a parklet or a bike lane or something like that?
Absolutely. So, it was great to see this all the way through. I was a huge advocate on us removing parking minimums here and got to see it come full circle when I got my own shop because I'm sure if we still had parking minimums, I would have this like problem, right? Because it's
Mm.
like, I don't know what their calculations are, but I recall a winery that was opening in an old dry cleaner,
Hmm.
right? And they could not open for months over like 4 parking spaces.
Yeah.
It was like so because of the minimum, they just couldn't
Yeah.
open different type of business. And as soon as the parking minimum were reduced, they were able to open up. And so,
Yeah.
like me seeing it full circle, I think the biggest comment I hear is like, "Oh, I can't believe how close I got to parking here." Like they're people who come and they're driving to my shop. They're always surprised that they can get parking typically right up front. So
Hmm.
there's a balance, right? One of them is, I'm open during the day. Typically, the residents nearby are at work. There's your parking. There's sometimes I'm the only car on, the street, from again, everyone going to work. There's times that, I'm open on the weekends. Guess what? People are out doing things. So it's like,
Right.
it's not ever been an issue. Like, I've never had like a comment or a message where someone's like, I can't find parking. And ironically, I think I would if we had off street parking because
Hmm.
then everyone's mind kind of goes to like, oh, he has dedicated parking. And let's say there's 6 parking spaces and I have 6 customers in there. They're probably more reluctant to park on the street at that point.
Yeah.
And so having it on street has been a big help for a couple of reasons. For one, I do carry outs if it's bigger plant, so I can actually walk out with you while keeping an eye on the shop, something I
Hmm.
probably couldn't have done if I had dedicated parking. um, Bike parking is another thing because again we're on the street level. Typically people can just peek out the window and see their bike there, so there's a lot of benefits to it in having like a dedicated parking lot in the back or dedicated bike parking in the back. It's just that visibility and it makes people really at ease to shop in peace and not have to worry about like you know something going on with their items.
Yeah, and you just made me think of a couple things there. One being this crazy idea of sharing space that's
Yeah.
needed by different populations at different times versus building two of the exact same thing for those populations. It cracks me up. I mean, I live in Phoenix metro area, and here we have like parking garage next to parking garage, and usually they're both completely empty all the time. And I'm like,
Yep.
okay, well, if these are both 25% full, one of them could be 50% full,
Yep.
and then later if different people come in, it drives me nuts. Every day at lunchtime I walk around and I don't count every space, but a lot of times I'll do a rough estimation of like in the middle of the busiest time of the day,
Yep.
this garage is this amount empty, this, and I'm doing simple math of like if you just added these two together,
Yep.
ah, it's just a crazy sort of thought. So it's a wild concept that I think when folks like yourself see it in practice, it almost seems too obvious where you're like, oh yeah, people that live here aren't here when they're
Yep.
at work, and so therefore folks that need to come to this area during that time have a place to park.
Have a
Like
place to park.
it's a very like, yeah, wonderful wonderful thing. And then the other piece that you said is kind of the induced demand sort of equation, right? With the
Yep.
parking in this case is like if you created a short supply of parking, people would almost feel a desire and need to get to those spots.
Yep. Yep.
Versus now, they're thinking more about your shop and what it has to offer, and just the fact that I'm going to get there however I can because I want to
Yep.
be there. Not, oh, I need to grab one of these spots, and if not,
Yep.
I lost my opportunity because I just drove all the way there and whatnot. So it's fascinating that that kind of sets itself up in the way that it does.
Absolutely. And, you know, another piece of it is just being in a walkable neighborhood, and being mindful of the items I carry is a
Hmm.
big help, because the way I'm looking at it is like, what can someone like literally carry home in a bag? You know, whether it's a plant, even the potting mix, we're mindful of like it not being a heavy bag, or um, just smaller items. And that's a big help. You know,
Hmm.
records, obviously, you can, you know, carry records home. And so that balance absolutely helps. But I think as small business owners, we have to consider that when we're in these dense neighborhoods.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pivot a little bit to back to the family piece. I know you had
Yes.
mentioned earlier that your wife and you share one car. Is that right?
Yes.
Cool. I'm
So
in the same position. Or go ahead.
yeah, so I love to so it's my wife's car, and I always like say that to be very clear, because like it's my choice to be car free. So like she doesn't take public transit, you know, she's always going to take the car. And so it's always a conversation of like, hey, I
Sure.
got this going on. Is it okay if I use the car? So is it sharing? Yes. But I think there's a lot of assumptions sometimes that, oh, that's your car too. And it's like, no, like if
Ah,
my wife wants to go to get her feet done, guess what? I'm,
she's got
I
it.
got to
Yep.
find another way to do it. And that's just, that's our, you know,
Yep.
thing.
I mean, yeah, the reason I brought it up, and yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I'm in the exact same boat as you in that regard. So it's a pretty cool thing to have that. I think it's something that I fear sometimes in the larger car free conversation that I'm very much a proponent of myself in here in the States, but that we often polarize. It's like we'll sell them all and curse them or
Yes.
embrace them fully. And like if you're in between, you don't belong. It's our whole tribalist
Yeah.
thing that we do here, where it's like if you don't fit either group completely, you feel a little lost in the middle. There's community in the poles, but maybe in the middle there's kind of a lost zone. I
Yep.
think I'm really big and interested right now in pushing this idea of just reducing your household car total to
Yes.
one less than you have right now. Can you find a way to make the math work to go one less than you have right now? And I'm
Yes.
curious to hear maybe your personal story for your household on how that works for you, maybe how you got to that point. I don't know your history with, your personal car ownership and things like that, but
Sure.
maybe how you got to the point where this one car worked and some decisions that you made. Maybe it's the area that you chose to live in, maybe a budget you set aside for rideshare, right? There's all sorts of angles that folks can take to make this work. I'd love to hear your personal take on that.
Absolutely. So I've actually had more years alive without a car than with a car.
That's awesome.
Both ways, you know, sometimes being in a city where I just absolutely needed one. But as of recent, I've been very conscious of where I live, how I get around, when events are they virtual? Again, being a dad, I just have to be in a mindset of like, okay, the bus is going to take me 45 minutes to get home. I might do this virtual just so I can kiss my daughter good night.
Yeah,
Or, yep, this finishes up at 6:30. I know I'll be home just in time, right? And so that's one piece of it, is like picking what I need to be in person for and what I can kind of get away virtually with.
sure.
Another piece is what I like to call is like squeezing out the last minutes, um, when we have to do like this like split off. And I what I mean by that is like some days I work the shop by myself from 12 to 5, right? Rather than me taking the car from 12 to 5, we'll actually go to the shop together as a family at like 10, and we'll
Hmm.
walk around. We'll do things like we'll hit the park, we'll go get coffee, like we spend that time together, and then they'll leave me, go do what they need to do. And then we'll kind of gauge whether I can get picked up or take the bus home. Um, we're not really biking distance from the shop, so that makes it difficult, but that's one
Yeah.
way that we squeeze that extra time together when you have one vehicle. Because that's another thing you hear sometimes is like people thinking like they can't sacrifice an extra 1 or 2 hours to be with your family, right? And that's why they
Mm,
have two cars. They have two cars because, well, I can't get up an extra hour earlier, or I can't leave an extra hour earlier. But yes, you really can when you almost have to. So that's one part of it. And then I also have a Brompton, a folding bike, and
nice.
I kind of use it in conjunction with the bus when I need that like last mile situation.
Yeah.
And that's been super handy. As far as like once I'm in the city and like I need to hit multiple meetings, I don't have to like worry about necessarily driving anywhere. I can just take the bus, and our bus system's free currently, right? So I can take the
Hmm.
bus where I need to go free, and then I just unfold and go where I need to go. But yeah, the reduction in trips definitely help. Uber, Lyft, car share is it's it has its ups and downs, right?
Sure.
Like it's not my I'd honestly take the bus sometimes more than rideshare, and it's not
Yeah.
even a cost thing. It's just that like I get the anxiety sometimes of like how long they are from me and like how long it will take me to get home. And sometimes it's the same. Like
Yeah.
they're 20 minutes away and then it's a 20-minute ride where I might as well just wait for the bus that's 15 minutes away. And yeah, I'll get home 20 minutes later, but it was, more
Right.
comfortable. It's just like some like changes. Yeah, and then it's a progression. So we've tested cargo bikes. We've when we're in other cities, my wife and I use bike share and like experience what it's like. And eventually, I think we'll get to that comfort level of being that biking family. But it's all about the decision. So like we're in a home buying process now. Like where are the bike lanes? Where are the future trails? Like those are the things that I'm like thinking about to ensure we're in a good position. But yeah, it's just the reduction of trips. You know,
Right.
and squeezing out that last minute, I think, make a huge difference.
Yeah, and it almost makes you more intentional about how you plan your
Yes,
travel, and you almost waste less time going places you didn't really need to go. Like we always end up
yes,
doing that where we will walk to the grocery store a lot, but maybe once a month we do like a big drive trip to the store. But instead of just going to the store, we'll be like, all right, we had to go over there anyway. We'll do it on the way
yep,
back. And so I think it's a lot of times it's not impossibility for folks as much as it is just more of a intentionality behind thinking about how you use your moments throughout the day, which, as you pointed out, actually can be a really positive things for other conversations in
yes,
your life and how you spend time with people and how you build relationships. So
yes,
that is a wonderful message, and I love that you talked about being in the middle of that process of
yes,
going through kind of getting better at it all the time, because it's not always easy, and sometimes you're like, oh, there has to be an easier way, but um there are easier ways coming, I think, is what folks
yes,
like ourselves are trying to get people to realize and work on at the same time. And so I think that there's a message of optimism in that, which I am very, very much a proponent of
yes,
for sure. I know you recently wrote a bit about the car light and car free kind of conversation. How do you see that playing out? I know I mentioned earlier kind of that polarizing conversation of car free and people being just pro car, but how do you kind of see the larger dialogue and the cultural conversation around cars at the current state in the United States?
I think it's a conversation that could be healthier, but I think that a lot
Amen.
of us is just frustrated,
Yeah.
right? We're frustrated with the infrastructure choices. We're frustrated with um, seeing our neighbors and our friends and people we love and care about get injured on a bicycle or as pedestrians. I've lost someone this year to traffic violence, and they were just walking down the sidewalk. Um, I think the tension is there enough where it's hard to have a friendly conversation, but
Yeah,
I
sure.
still think that as adults who genuinely want something to come out of this that is positive, we have to try. And so, for me, if you're car free, if you're car light, we're moving in the right direction. But what can't happen is we're just getting to a point of being naive to what cars have done, the space that they've taken from us, the people that they've taken from us, the money that it's taken from us. I mean, there's so many. It's to a point where the data speaks itself. But we all have someone that's unfortunately been in that situation, and um, I think that's where I'm hoping we are coming to a turning point. I
Mm.
think it's becoming an easier conversation to have because we don't have to debate as much as we just have to come to terms with what it is.
Yeah.
Before it was like not out there as easy to see, but I think now that EVs are coming into the conversation and self-driving cars are coming into the conversation, I think um, people know their boundaries, but I think they're also just understanding like, wow, I never knew that I'm spending almost, $1,000 in car ownership a year. I don't look at
Oftentimes
it
a lot
like that.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't look at it like that, but um it's the data, it's the facts. I've saved $776 a month by not having a car.
Yeah.
I mean, I went down to the dollar on my own, and that's where I was like, I don't need a car anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the journey is one that could be more positive and it can be more healthier, but I definitely think we're moving in the right direction. What I would love to see is the people not getting cross. Excuse me. I would love to see the people who are kind of they're getting strays caught because they have to use a vehicle because of redlining, because of
Mhm.
displacement, because of just their scenario, right? If you live where I live in Richmond, which is deep South Side, you have to have a car. My bus comes every hour.
Mm.
I have a little bit more patience and flexibility, but there's people who are working 2 and 3 jobs
Sure.
to take care of themselves. They have to have a car. So I just want us to move away from that whole like, you have a car, you're the enemy, to like
For sure.
really having a healthier conversation about like how can we reduce as a whole. If you
Right.
can't reduce, I'll reduce twice as much. But
Mm.
like it can't be a thing of like, well, I reduced and you did nothing, so you're the enemy. We really
Sure.
have to be there for each other right now.
Absolutely. No, and I think as much as I can, I try not to blame the individual driver for the state of our
Yes.
cities. It's the lack of a network, and network meaning a lot of different things, right? The bus, the light rail, the bike, the sidewalks, whatever it may be in your given town or city. It's the lack of that network connection, and at scale especially. But yeah, to your point, I think there's a lot of the negativity towards individuals, and I think it actually gives a lot of, kindle to the fire for the opposition as well of, oh, these walkable cities, these are just utopias where, they're
Right.
inaccessible to certain populations. And we're supposed to be the ones that are on the side of accessibility. And
Right.
that's really what we're lobbying for, is a better public transit network, more,
Right.
like shorter headways to what you just spoke
Yes.
about with the bus, those sorts of things. And so the less that we can mess around with these comments of like almost alienating the
Yes.
populations that, like you said, have to have a car, and it's putting them at a disadvantage, and we should look at that cost that they're having to incur as part of the issue, not as part, not giving it as fuel to the other side. And I think we're doing that a lot. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think there's a real value in making sure that we continue to direct this productive conversation at the correct solutions and not at the, negative, easy, low hanging fruit. So thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the last thing I kind of wanted to jump into with you, as an idea, is Richmond itself. Uh, Last year, I put a video out, and I'm about to. I don't like announcing things before I do them, because I like to actually like have some work and momentum going behind some. But I think I'm getting close enough to where we can talk about it a little bit. But I'm working on this kind of sub series to Good Traffic that's going to be called Walkable Pockets, and it's
Oh,
going to be
sweet.
looking at pockets in kind of a double entendre sense, where it's pockets of the US, small, maybe it's part of a neighborhood and part of a city, maybe it's a section of a neighborhood that are walkable but also affordable. So pockets also kind of in the sense of affordability, um, because I think a lot of times people just start to, when they hear our words and our kind of conversation, they think of New York, San Francisco,
Yes,
Boston, the usual suspects, and they instantly remove themselves from that conversation because those places are unaffordable and unattainable. Those are vacation spots. They're not livable places. And I put a video out about this last year and got a lot of comments about, I live in rural Oklahoma. Where should I move that's walkable? And a lot of people actually seeking these places. And I realized there's a lot of people that like just are looking for something more walkable than where they are right now. And
absolutely.
so I put a follow up video out that was kind of on TikTok asking, where are some of the places that folks who do live in maybe places they think are walkable pockets? Where would you, be a proponent of or like to advocate for, or think I should do a deeper dive on and share on my platforms? And Richmond was one of the top places that I got recommended to look into deeper for walkable pockets. And so I'm really curious just to kind of hear, first of all, why you have chosen to live there as an urbanist and think that that is a great base for you in your work. But also, just you hit a couple of things, removing parking minimums, having
Yes,
free bus fare, things like that. But
yes.
what are some of the top things that Richmond is doing to be a city for people and a place for folks to live car free or car light, or just more, urbanist minded, I would say?
Absolutely. So before I decided to come back home to Richmond, I had all type of cities out there. I had
Mm,
Pittsburgh. I had um, Raleigh, Durham. The Raleigh and Durham.
yeah.
Just put that out there. But yeah, Raleigh and Durham. I had smaller cities like Carborough, North
Mm,
Carolina. I had Greenville, South Carolina. I mean, my wife and I were on a tour, it felt like, to just see, hey, where could we be that's, like you said, affordable, but like also like take advantage of the urban fabric. And it kept feeling like, man, I'm just overlooking my hometown. Like,
mm,
we have a great brewery scene. We have, several walkable pockets. We have a great art scene. We have the James River. We have free bus fare. Um, but most importantly, we have, I think, one of the just tightest communities of advocates that allowed us to get some major, major um, changes happening here in Richmond that will put us in a very special place when you think of a lot of these cities. So we have removed parking minimums. We have free bus fare until June 2025. We just got ADUs by right approved, which is huge.
that's
Accessory dwelling
massive. Yeah.
units. So in residential zones, we've also just pushed through a short term rental ordinance that
Mm,
will limit the amount of short term rentals in residential areas, but then also ensure that there's a primary residency clause in there. So we
mm,
just don't have people coming in and buying up and living
sure.
elsewhere. So all of this has allowed us to um, be in this special place. But then there's things like our Fall Line Trail, which is a multi use bike path that will be 41 miles from
Mm,
Ashland, Virginia, down about Petersburg, Virginia, and it'll cut through Richmond, Virginia. So, if you ever been on the Indianapolis Cultural Trail or the W&OD Trail out in DC, or the American Tobacco Trail down in Durham, these are some
mm,
of the um, trails that we seek to, resemble. And I think that will really open up a lot as far as just being known as a biking city. I think an article just came out that we were the fifth city in increased bike trips, and so we're making noise, and
yeah.
we're diverse. But for me, as density dad, for me, I just enjoy that we can do a cargo bike meetup, and you just see families
Yeah.
everywhere, right? You see. Um, People coming together to try and say, hey, just take my bike for a spin. Like, go, try it for yourself. And that's what excites me about Richmond is that I feel we are coming to this cusp of like, I don't want to enjoy this city in this different context by myself. I want to share it with my neighbors so that they get excited about living here and like they
Mm,
get to experience it the way that I do. Um, and how I probably wouldn't have experienced it otherwise, right? So to be able to have this network of advocates who are really about um, leaving no one behind, right? Like it's very easy to live in the same city and have two different experiences. And I say that as a person of color and as someone who's from here, right?
Mm,
And experiencing gentrification and displacement. But it's still possible to experience that from things like having the privilege of living in a walkable, like an actual walkable neighborhood compared to being further out in the county.
sure.
So there's things that I think Richmond that it's doing we're 2 hours from DC, 2.5 hours from DC. We can take the train. I mean, there's just all these great
Yeah.
things that I think just makes it exciting. Um, and so yeah, I think it's cool that people mentioned us. Because
Yeah.
I don't think of it even as a native as the first, but as being back here for about a year and a half now is definitely something I would always shout from the rooftops now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. And I definitely need to visit. I have not come and spent any
Brad, you
time, so
gotta
I
come.
I need to. I can count on you for a tour.
Absolutely, I need that Phoenix tour. I gotta see Cul-de-sac in person. I gotta see it.
Yeah, it's awesome. I live just a couple light rail stops away, so I'm I'm very close here in Tempe, and Tempe's a really cool place. Phoenix, is kind of a sprawling nightmare, but I will say Tempe is doing a lot of really cool stuff, and that's why I'm here myself. But yeah, no, I'm excited. We'll do this. We'll set up a little a little idea exchange and city exchange here. It'll be perfect. I'm looking forward to it. The last
Awesome.
question that I ask everyone when I don't forget to ask them, which I'm not today, and I'm pumped about that, is in your whole life, all the places you've worked, places you've gone to school, whatever it may be, what is your one favorite commute that you've ever had? One route that you would take to and from a place of employment. With this show being called Good Traffic, I'm really trying to
Yes.
have people fall in love with the way they get to and from places. And I think we
Yes.
need to slow down and think about that a little more. So I'm assuming you have some good ones. But yeah,
Yes. Wow. I um does conferences count? Like when you travel for work and stuff like that too?
we can do that.
Um
Yeah.
yeah, I will say when I was in Denver recently for the NACTO Design of Cities conference,
Mm,
um as an urbanist that like gets excited about development, but then also seeing sprawl in the truest sense, taking their train from the airport into the city and seeing sprawl like literally in my eyes for a urbanism conference. It was like wow,
yeah.
but like seeing the infill and seeing like things happen and then seeing the mountains, like just seeing Denver through a lens that I had never been there before, but then also just not expecting to see um, urbanism and great bike trails. Like I think you can bike to the airport there. I think it was a multi-use path. I saw all the way to the airport, and so again, it was just like pretty cool to see it unfold in front of you. And I can't wait to go back because apparently they're filling it in at this point. So
Yeah, I've done that train a few times, and that is a long trip. That airport is
yes,
out there.
yeah.
That airport is out there, but the train is super, quick relatively, and
Yes,
yeah, you do get to see Commerce City and all the different sprawling suburbs and just far,
yep,
far outer burbs in that trip. But and Union Station is awesome once you get into downtown.
yes,
That is a good trip. I think that's a good commute to call out there. Yeah, you're giving me good flashbacks here. So.
yeah, yeah. So that's definitely what I would pick.
Awesome. Well, Barry, thank you so much for your time today. This has been an awesome conversation, and I'm really grateful for your time. And I'm glad we got to do this. And I'm looking
Absolutely,
forward to continuing our chat and our hopefully some crossovers as time progresses and continuing to share ideas and, like I said, spaces that we both inhabit and both visit and all that good stuff. Before we get out of here, definitely want you to share kind of where folks can find you, best place to get in touch, to follow along with your work, and to support you.
absolutely. So you can follow density.dad. So that's a website. You can keep up with my articles. You can subscribe to my newsletter there. You can also, read any podcast that I've been appeared on. So you'll at some point will be able to listen to this on there as well. But just a portfolio of all the work that I've been able to be a part of, and stay in contact. Shoot me a message. I'm on all social media at Barry Barry Green GreeneneJr, and then on Instagram at density.dad.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Barry. Keep up all the great work. We need more folks like you in cities around the U.S. So appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Nice. That was great.